So, Pokemon Winds and Waves was announced a couple of months back, and I never got around to talking about it on this channel despite wanting to. So, let's change that. Now, I figured it would be important to quickly go over the relationship I've had with Pokemon over the years to give a bit of context. I am indeed one of those individuals that kind of lost interest in it during the Switch era. I imagine you've heard the complaints surrounding the likes of Sword and Shield, Scarlet and Violet, and Legend ZA time and time again, so I won't bore you with what's already been said several times already. I did, however, make an exception for Legends Arceus, which I would personally consider one of my favourite Pokemon games of all time, and I did eventually play a bit of Shield after receiving it as a birthday gift a couple of years back, and I've enjoyed it for what it was. And now, fast forward to 2026, and we've been shown glimpses of what the 10th generation on Switch 2 is going to look like. I think I'm finally getting excited about the future of Pokemon again. And while it is true that in the grand scheme of things, Winds and Waves isn't exactly revolutionary when we compare it to other games in the present day, in the graphical sense at least, I think it is more of what we had in mind when it comes to how we pictured a full-on console Pokemon experience would look. Obviously, the way the tropical environment looks is pretty nice, with the waves and the moving windmills and whatnot, but I also want to bring attention to some of the details found in the Pokemon themselves. We've got Pikachu here getting in a battle-ready pose, which is already much more expressive compared to what we've seen in the main series where he just stands there. And in the faint little glows that we see in the likes of Slugma, the way one Duskull's eyes follow another floating past, it makes me hopeful that we'll see wild Pokemon interacting with one another in interesting ways, kind of comparable to the way that you see enemies sort of fighting each other in Xenoblade Chronicles 3 for example. Maybe there'll be full-on ecosystems that follow predator-prey dynamics between certain Pokemon species, like a Wailord chasing after a school of Wishiwashi or something along those lines. There's a lot of potential to be explored here. I do imagine that it might be a big ask to program all of this detail for potentially up to 1,000 different species if all of them were to be included, especially for a franchise that's kind of under pressure to see frequent releases in order to keep up with its other media like the anime and trading card game. But the fact that Winds and Waves are skipping this year entirely seems to be a green flag that Game Freak are taking the time with this one. Seeing as Pokemon is practically guaranteed to sell extremely well regardless of its perceived quality, you'd think Nintendo would just want to get the next generation out within the Switch 2's first year. But I guess that's why we've got the likes of Legends ZA and Pokopia to fill that void for the time being. And sure, maybe not wanting to clash with GTA 6 is also a perfectly valid reason, since new Pokemon entries typically come out around November time, but not even the highest grossing media franchise of all time wants to go near that thing. Now obviously, graphics and visuals aren't everything in a game. There's definitely a lot more to Pokemon that has kept us hooked on it for so long, even during periods where the games have been getting a lot of flack. So let's get into the gameplay itself. Naturally, I imagine that Winds and Waves will expand on the more open world sort of design that Scarlet and Violet went for, and while I skipped those games, from what I can tell, that aspect seems to be what people generally give credit to, and that's the ability to take on certain objectives in the order you desire. Do feel free to correct me if I'm wrong though. But the prospect of exploring this new region that seems to take you from island to island gives me strong Wind Waker vibes, which is always a good thing, as that's one of my favourite games of all time. What is most interesting, however, is this shot at the end of the trailer that takes the camera underwater, strongly implying that undersea exploration will be a thing. What is this, Pokemon meets Endless Ocean? Jokes aside, this has a lot of immersive potential. Just diving underwater, seeing what kind of secrets are waiting to be discovered. Maybe there's an Atlantis-inspired city with a hidden society and a gym. Or a new legendary to be captured in the deepest of depths. Who knows? And of course, I can't go without mentioning the new starters. I think Pombon might be my personal favourite out of the three. You can't resist a good old doggo, and I typically go for the fire type as they're usually the least common to obtain elsewhere. Gekua, on the other hand, also looks pretty cool, but considering the tropical nature of Winds and Waves setting, I imagine there'll be an abundance of other water options to choose from throughout the adventure. And while the grass type Brout would also be tempting to tackle said abundance, I fancy a challenge, and going against the odds with my Pomeranian buddy. Something else I've wanted to bring special attention to while we're at it is also the potential for what could come after Winds and Waves. More specifically, how the inevitable Black and White remakes will be handled. I'm sure many of us have noticed that there's somewhat of a pattern where ever since Generation 4 with Heart Gold and Soul Silver onwards, the odd-numbered generations have skipped remakes, so that they're double of their origin generation if that makes sense. With the exception of Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, which was handled by a different developer, the remakes are typically done in the style of the generation's origin game beforehand, and it makes me curious to see if Gen 5 will also go back to that. Honestly, considering strong first impressions of Winds and Waves, I think seeing the Unova region remade in this style would be great to see. Even if its generally linear reputation goes against the likely open world nature, but who knows, maybe it could be done justice, and the prospect of that is pretty exciting, considering Gen 5 was my introduction to Pokémon and still my favourite to this day. Maybe development resources are dedicated to Winds and Waves considering how much longer games take to develop nowadays with technological advancements and whatnot, so maybe this is wishful thinking on my part, but I'd also happily take an HD 2D remake, sort of Octopath Traveler styled remake if it can't realistically be done, and if they insist on handing remakes over to other developers. Anyway, I think that just about does it for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. Let me know if you're looking forward to Winds and Waves in the comments, and be sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel for more coverage on Pokemon or other games of interest. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, see you later.